Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing tonight, this morning, tomorrow, wherever it happens to be where you are? Welcome to Neurofeedback and Chill. This is our Monday night, for me anyways, Monday night live stream, answering your questions about neurofeedback, about biohacking, about brain things. And usually that starts off with me doing some neurofeedback on myself and demystifying the process a little bit. And then typically we have a topic that we go into as well. And tonight we're going to talk about downtraining, which is a special flavor or approach when doing neurofeedback that is a little specialized. And there's a few theories or ideas about how we use it. And I know there's some geeks that watch this live stream or participate live who are into some of the ideas around neurofeedback and some of the deeper stuff. So this is for you guys. So let me know if you can hear me. My audio tends to be a little hit or miss sometimes. I think it's okay right now. What I'm going to do is set myself up a neurofeedback protocol and then chat about some downtraining. And downtraining really is this process of inhibiting brainwaves or gently tamping them down. And it doesn't just mean that we are, trying to operate where they are pushed in a linear direction. It's more that you're exercising the waves in a certain way to break up patterns or connectivity or, other stuck phenomena. And sometimes when we think about the cortex, we are thinking about other brain waves and other regions that are coupling to the region that we are training. And so downtraining can be useful there to free up, if you will, areas. And then you also want to think about downtraining as a function of or useful in training some brain waves that are a little bit harder to manipulate. If you manipulate delta with neurofeedback, it can be a little risky. If you manipulate alpha, it can push back a little bit. So one of the ways you can get those brain waves to change more safely is with inhibits on them as opposed to rewards. And so I'll get into that as you guys have specific questions, but I'll set myself up first on in a neurofeedback session. So let me take this little guy and put it someplace else. Let's make it small and leave it on the screen. That way people can know what they're jumping onto. All right, so I'm going to set myself up on an eager neurofeedback session. So this software is called Eager, and it's what I use for neurofeedback, i.e. training the brain. So here we have some little head plots with settings on it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an FZ minus PZ. These little spots in the head are over the cingulates, the anterior cingulate in the front and the posterior cingulate in the back. And I'll explain in a moment why I'm doing these, but I'm going to set up a downtraining. So in Eager, you can modify, you can flip a band down. So it starts off as a reward band, and by default, it's RWRD, but you can tap it and make it down, which is great. You can also train to the center of the band, etc. So there's downtraining. If you notice now in Eager, it says down next to the label, and we want to train down, let's do 10 to 20. Well, let's do 12 to 20. 12 to 20. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to train, also inhibit 20 to 32. And those won't have exactly the same impact. The downtraining and the inhibits will be a little different. I'm also inhibiting 4 to 7 hertz. And there's a couple different reasons that will have different impacts on a downtraining band versus an inhibit band. One of the reasons is the frequency that it occurs in. As you move up the frequency, the individual contribution that a single hertz, if you will, of beta contributes to a band is reduced compared to things like theta. So sometimes amplitude changes don't get picked up as much when you have a beta change. Let's see, let's do this not that long. This is a little bit of, for me anyways, sensitive. I'm gonna do 6 minutes. 8, 7, 6. And then I'm gonna do an SMR protocol after it. And this is gonna be a C4 minus A2. Let's do 4 to 7. And this is a reward. It says rewarding 15 to 18, and based on this paper I'm going to talk about, I should probably pick something in the beta range, but I'm not gonna, I'm going to do an SMR 11.5 to 14.5. So this is a regular style SMR protocol. And we'll do 22 to 34 as a high inhibit. Now, if you're a peak brain client, you don't have to worry about this. But if you're not, when you go into a settings, you have a setup, you have to actually configure the auto goals if you want to use them. And this just means that every 30 seconds we will have the computer adjust next to the person, so you don't have to sit there and ride the thresholding. And once we have signals on the screen, I'll explain what the thresholding and things mean more. I added a setup, so let me add a run before, make it a run, and let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a setup, and then we'll add a run after, make that a run, and we'll do a little bit longer. Let's just do 9 minutes. So a pretty short session for me tonight, just 15 minutes of training in a 2-segment protocol. And so what I'm doing initially is an FC minus PZ, or singlet downtraining, inhibiting 4 to 7, downtraining 12 to 20 hertz, and also inhibiting 20 to 32. And then we'll switch over to do C4 minus A2, so right hemisphere focused SMR training or low beta training. And we'll do a little more of that. And that tends to add a little bit of center of gravity, some weight. Whoops, unlicensed mode and session plan. Wait, unlicensed mode? Uh-oh. Invalid unlicensed feedback mode. Is my software not licensed? That's weird. I wonder why. Oh, you know what, maybe? Let's see. It says I'm licensed. Single A. I may have unplugged my software key. That's weird. I should be able to run anyways on this downtraining. Let's see if they'll let me run. Zoom mazes, variable dot mazes. Okay. Oh, it says whiz bad. Okay, so I know what's happening. So what's happening is my amplifier is also not being seen. So what that means is my USB cable that has my software key and my amplifier on it has gotten unplugged. So let me first just kind of eyeball it. Oh, it looks like it's plugged in. That means Eager has to get restarted. Yeah, let me first just do the amp. Let me set the amp. Hi, Jayhan. Could I comment on downtraining beta or high beta? I will do absolutely that. Yeah. Let me first quit and relaunch Eager, though, because it's not going to let us pick up the license without a relaunch, is my guess. And the whiz bad. Okay. Ignore my messy desktop. So Jayhan, with substance use patients for high beta, one would normally think about beta spindles probably, and not so much the beta itself. Like, you actually can do a lot of work in the slow frequencies when it comes to substance use. Like alcohol, you would train up alpha, train up theta potentially. Sort of breaking my rules there. Let me see if the planning is set up. It's probably not. I might just go back in and do another second. No, it's still there. Down training. Cool. All right. And no license error this time. Yay. Let's see. I'm going to assume that it's running okay, and I'm going to put the wires in my head and talk to you guys for a second and answer questions while we're doing that. All right. There we go. I prefer to be in the top upper left. Let's put some wires on. Now I'm going to do an FZ minus PZ to begin, which means that one of the wires will be in the front, one in the back, and then I'll need an ear clip as the ground wire. Let's say I have several wires here. And then for the second half, I'll do C4 minus A2. So that means my right ear clip will be in use. So let me go ahead and set that one up. Just one ear clip I think I can get away with. There we go. And 2 flat wires. There's one. And here's a second one. There we go. Okay. We have sufficient wires out of the tangle. Let me untangle the rest of them while I'm doing this here. There we go. Let's get those out of the way of the kitty cats. Their favorite thing is to steal wires. That's why they're tangled in the first place at home. All right, here we go. So Jehan, you would often get beta to drop just by doing alpha theta in terms of alcohol. And so you don't have to train down the beta itself clinically. It's often not the right idea, actually. Now, if somebody has, for substance use, a part of the reason they're doing substances is because they have hot cingulate beta, like, you know, what I'm training down tonight, meaning you would get intrusive thoughts and obsessiveness, then yeah, you might want to train it down. And therefore targeting the band like we're going to do tonight on me makes some sense. But in general, in alcohol, the over-arousal phenomena you'll see with excess beta, you shouldn't go after as a beta down training. You should instead work on the regulatory features of low beta, get the sleep changing, then do alpha theta to sort of re-educate the brain's ability to shift into a GABAergic mode. And that will bring down the beta by itself. So in this case, you don't have to target broad, hypercoherent, hyper-elevated beta in the case of long-term drinkers. You probably shouldn't. Now, that isn't the only kind of beta you'll see. You'll see beta spindles. You'll see all kinds of interesting beta features, and you may have reasons to target them clinically. But in that case, I think we're talking about really tailoring it to the individual using the QEEG to some extent and the raw EEG instead of the sort of principle of down training more broadly. Hey, Radar Ashwood, how you doing tonight? I see another answer here. Another person showing up and asking questions. Let me get those wires on. So we said an ear clip on the right ear. And the ground location doesn't really matter. You can always put the ground anywhere you want. And so I'm going to use the ground socket in the amp going to the right ear here. There we go. But then when I switch halfway through, I'm going to use it as the reference. So I'm using a little UWiz amp, so it's red minus black. So this is the green for the ground. And then we need the other two locations. So let's do green minus, or yellow minus green. So that's yellow minus green is the black socket minus the, red socket minus the black socket, yellow minus green. So yellow's in the front, green's in the back. Now, if I happen to flip these two locations and just made them reverse, the only thing it would do is flip the waveform upside down. It wouldn't actually change this training protocol because this is not training on the shape of the sign of the data, only the amount of the data. Let's see if I can get a good, I think it's about here. Let's do that. There we go. Can't see my screen. Let's see. How am I doing? I think I'm doing okay. Close enough. All right, and then the back of my head. So down training again is a technique that you use when you might not want to go after reward. You might not want to train a brain because there are beta spindles or there is extra beta. You know, in the cases of strong anxiety, in the cases of strong nervous system over-arousal, like autism sometimes, or recent trauma, developmental trauma, you can see huge amounts of beta just persistent all the time. And you don't necessarily want to start getting in and supporting better regulation through bringing up strength of tissues as much as you might need to or want to bring down overactivation first. And so, there's a bunch of ways you could do that. You could train below the frequency someone's at and kind of slow down the tissue a little bit, and that can help. But generally, you want to do sort of a down training where you target the biggest things that are in the way and you leave holes where there may need to be brainwaves brought up, especially alpha. Alpha doesn't always respond perfectly to raising it. So what you can do is you can leave a hole or a gap, a window from like 7 to 10 or even wider from 6 to 12 if you wanted to. And the alpha will rise into that gap. If you're inhibiting 4 to 7 and you're inhibiting 12 to 20 like I'm doing tonight, then the 7 to 12 is alpha, basically. And that will allow slow alpha, 7 to 10, and fast alpha, 10 to 13, to rise on their own as the beta that might be in the way of those frequencies will drop away. And the theta, which is a disinhibition of the brain in that area, that'll go away. So the brain gets more self-control, and you also reduce the sort of noise a little bit, and that allows these medium frequencies to come up. So that's one way that I use downtraining, is by going after these sort of medium windows, and it's called a windowed squash, essentially, where you leave this gap and allow the brain to rise into it. So I also sometimes will do downtraining to change coherence. If you train the difference between locations and you inhibit, then you're inhibiting the difference between them, which makes them more similar. So you can do some like poor man's coherence kind of stuff, or you can break up hypercoherence areas by doing downtraining of specific frequencies that are coupled to other frequencies. So, it's very powerful to sort of look at the QEEG and see the interconnectivity between both frequencies and sites and figure out what might be driving what. All right, I think I'm set up here tonight. Let me get up my session going. You can see we got about 10 people here. Hey guys, how's everyone Monday doing? If it's Monday for you, if it's not, where are you? If you're someplace in the world, where is that? Let me get the amplifier someplace nice and stable. I'm using the little U-Wiz. I'm gonna clip it to my collar here so it's not bouncing on my lap. There we go. All right. Got the plan ready. Let's run it. We shall run it. Let's see if the amplifier is actually being seen. Variable.mazes, nice and simple. There we go. So it says whiz in the bottom right. That's the first thing you look for, is something in the bottom right that's reading green. That's a lot of noise on this channel. Let's see. Are these in the right locations? They are. One of my electrodes must not be on very tightly. Let's see. It's a lot of muscle tension being picked up instead of brain waves. So let's see what we can do about that. First unclip this. Okay. Yeah, so that's basically solid muscle tension, or 50 hertz noise because there's not much connectivity. There we go. So I literally just laid the amp down, and now I'm getting actual EEG. That's pretty cool. So apparently the amp just wanted to not be touched. All right, cool. All right, so now I have 3 different frequencies being picked up. And you can see down here we have 4 to 7, and that's next to the purple box. It's labeled 4 to 7 hertz. That's theta. So right now I'm making, let me scale this because it's not scaled properly either. Is this 9? It is. And then 11. Oh, that's 10. Oh. There we go. All right, so I am making 18 microvolts now of theta, and generally you want theta to go down. So you can see the average, the AVG is 20 microvolts, and I've set a THR threshold at 27. That's the lines outside of the waveform here. And whenever my brain stays below that, it's gonna allow the game to run on the screen. And then we have what would normally be another band that's a reward, but in this case, it's another inhibit. Now, the inhibit percentages are different. So if I hit F11, let me do that. I think it's this one. There it is. Now, the far right, the inhibit percentage says 25, 65, 15, roughly. And that was the percentages I set up. So now the inhibit here is I'm making 14 microvolts of the 12 to 20, and I want to keep myself below that. So my threshold set at 14.75. And then I have a 20 to 32 high frequency beta that's also being inhibited. So now these are all treated a little bit differently. And my brain will react a little differently to these 3. Let me answer some questions. Rebecca saying, hi, Rebecca. I did this protocol tonight. Yay. I was having self-harm urges, and after I did this protocol, those urges were gone. It can be really good. This protocol can be really good for intrusive thoughts. It's one of my favorites. I have a whole suite of FZ minus PZ setups, and this particular one can be really useful for some people. I'm glad that helped, Rebecca. Hi, Triona Bateman. How are you doing tonight? regarding downtraining, theta, given an 18-month post-TBI case, okay, what's your view on how inflammation might influence theta activity, and if theta is elevated above 5 standard deviations on a QEEG at the back of the head? I would wonder a couple things. I'd wonder what delta was doing, because if it's theta high but delta's not, that's one phenomena. I would also wonder what the speeds are doing. If the alpha speed is crashing and the delta speed is climbing, then you have that sort of classic cortical thalamic phenomena, and you can go after it with SMR training. If you instead have just giant amounts of delta and theta everywhere, both running fast, both running excessively, then you have like an inflammatory phenomena, like the actual hit is still sort of lingering in a post-concussive state. And then you have to be really careful, because now somebody's going to be like hair trigger for overtraining with all that inflammatory stuff going on. Treat it like an active event, basically, at that point. I'd be very careful. With that kind of phenomena, assuming they're stable with the back of the head, they're probably having a lot of light sensitivity. I would normally, with that population, go after things like EEG, hemoencephalography, or blood flow training as a way to accentuate or accelerate the recovery of that visual tissue being so sensitive, especially if there's migraine stuff going on, and there might be with someone like that. Triona's asking, would I be concerned that inflammation is a contributing factor? Absolutely, yeah. But only if like delta and theta are high. With concussion stuff, TBI stuff, you'll see theta climbing post-accident, and then you'll see it staying high for a year or two as the brain heals, if you will. And then it goes into very low power sometimes in the areas that were injured. So there's focal areas of blue power, low delta, that's one phenomena. And then it's not the inflammatory phenomena anymore. Now it's more of regions not being well connected. Now it's about the excess theta itself, and you can go right after it. So I would look at it very carefully, Triona. Look at the slow, medium, and fast, delta, theta, alpha in the slow brain waves, and their relationship should help you understand how acutely this phenomenon is like in the metabolic landscape, if it's loaded in the low end, or if it's more regulatory, if it's more the thetas and the alphas doing it. So alpha speed dipping, theta speed all over the place. It'll be off in one direction strongly, and the delta speed usually low, and that's one phenomena, versus the deltas and the thetas just excessive everywhere. It's a different phenomena. So you can distinguish those two things. Let me finish up that question for you, and then I'll get my session going. Would I be, let's see, and would I still expect a downtraining to decrease theta? Yeah, maybe, but I would actually I don't think downtraining would be the goal at that point. I would go after SMR, because if they have inflammatory stuff, high theta, high delta, even with strong beta, you can still train SMR, low beta training, and it brings down the extra beta, brings down the delta, brings down the extra theta. So I actually think you don't have to get fancy in a case like that, Triona. Hey, Radar Ashwood, how's it going? In my experience, does SMR affect posture? If so, why is this? Yeah, it can. It can affect all kinds of things, like your ability to hear time, or your ability to move your body in a more fine-grained way. And yeah, posture, because SMR is part of the tissue complex, the sensory motor tissue complex. It's the idling frequency along with the mu waves. It's very similar in some ways to mu in terms of like how it operates. Mu is the idling alpha, and SMR is the idling beta, you can think. And they both have this kind of special flavor of bursting and doing modulatory stuff. And you're going to have the A sending information up to the SM strip is so much information, and the D sending information to control the body is less. So yeah, you change the SMR in the SM strip, you're going to be more aware of your body, more proprioceptively sort of in tune with what's going on. And it should change your coordination, your grace, your ease of using your body. It absolutely makes people less clumsy. It makes them a better athletic performer. It helps in cases of developmental issues when there's ataxia or other difficulties with movement and fine grain movement especially. So you can see a lot of things there. Yeah. All right, let me get my, Triona saying delta is also high. Yeah, so it's inflammatory probably. So EEG, SMR training, You can probably not have to get super fancy. Let me kick off my session. Where's my game? Okay. Kick off my session, F5. There we go. And get my game on the screen. All right, so you can see my little Pac-Man's eating Pac-Man dots. What happens in this game is whenever my slow brainwave, my 4 to 7 climbs, the dots get big. And whenever all the brainwaves are in range, little Pac-Man will munch along, and there's a beep happening. Let me turn up the volume for a second. So you can see I'm making beeps. Too loud. Sorry. So I'm chugging along, making beeps. Completely involuntary. No, you're making brainwaves all the time, involuntarily. You can't feel them. And so what this is a parameterized applause, meaning the beeps and the movement and the little guy eating the dots only happens if my brainwaves are trending or staying in the right direction. And every 30 seconds, the computer will adjust to keep the computer next to where my brain is. That was the 30-second thresholding. So you can see how it slowed down there. I must have been dropping my beta too much. And so the computer adjusted. You can see the lines around the brainwaves have moved. And that's because it's adjusting next to my brain. And now it's only going to beep at me and move if my brain keeps making lower beta. Okay, so there we go. So that's my first down training. Let's see. So that's one of the big things I want to talk about in terms of like how you can, clinically use down training. You guys have lots of great questions. VJ is saying light sensitivity usually shows up as hypercoherence. No, I was just guessing back of the head. OZ, PZ, P4, etc. Visual stuff with a concussion, inflammatory stuff. You can't resist the sensory input. It's exhausting. It's flooding. Jay Hand's asking, how did I move my game to the trainer's screen? Oh, I'm just playing tricks in OBS. The same way I put my floating head above the training screen. This is just an OBS overlay. There are ways to do it. It's a bit of a trick. So what you do is you get a headless HDMI dongle, little stub dongle, and you plug it into your computer. And then what you do is you go into the Windows display and you create a virtual monitor. And then you take that virtual monitor and you put it on top of, in this place, your picture-in-picture, your regular monitor. And then you set up Eager to select the second virtual monitor to be the game display. And then it works like picture-in-picture on a big TV or something. That's sort of what I've done here, but I've just used OBS to do it, to capture the second display. I have a second TV at eye level here. That's like a, 60-inch TV or something. And so the game is on that screen. I've also got it mirrored here in the OBS window. That's my little trick there, Jahan. Radar was asking, why do people call QEEG guided the traditional neurofeedback when the field was developed without the use of QEEG? Because it's phenotypes, and the field was developed based on the idea of SMR training, which is a phenotype training, and then it was sort of validated. QEEG came along not too long after neurofeedback did, and it's used for other things, but these days they converge. So people that do SMR training, or people that do the arousal model, it's also called, usually do QEEGs. And so QEEGs have become the best way to do traditional work. It's just one of the tools that we use. So QEEG informed training is what traditional neurofeedback is, phenotype training. But you can also do QEEG training. You can do full head Loretta Z-score training. That's not traditional. It's still QEEG training, but now you're training the QEEG. I would say traditionalists don't train the QEEG in real time. They learn from the QEEG and the clinical history and the performance, and they develop systematic and strategic ways of gently testing ideas about somebody, because people are so weird that we don't want to assume ahead of time that what we're going after is going to work. And so if you train to the middle of the database, there's a lot of assumptions built in there and a lot of things being trained. And instead, here I'm training 3 bands, a couple locations, 6 minutes. I'm going to get a small effect, and I'm very sensitive. So I'm going to feel it and go, okay, it felt like that. In fact, I already feel it. I feel a little more even keeled, a little more still. I tend to be a little high energy and not frenetic, but enthusiastic, impulsive, something like that. And I think it's probably the theta down training that's giving me this sense of steadiness or even keeledness, but pretty nice. All right, I'm only 5 minutes in. I'm going to do 6 minutes, so this will stop before the maze finishes. Most games in Eager do a 3-minute period, and they just give you how many, and I do 3-minute multiples of training time as a little like rep. In mazes, you'll finish before, or the end of a 3-minute chunk, or before one, because it finishes every maze basically. And Artichoke, hello Artichoke. Sequential training is not phase locked, so it's not similar to any sort of coherence training. Sure, yeah, but I'm doing difference training, if you will. I have FZ minus PZ, so that is impacting the similarity of the signal between FZ and PZ. So that's not sequential. It's bipolar, if you will. The signal is the difference between those locations. And, if I really wanted to do some sort of coherence training, I would do a sum training or a difference training between two full channels with a shared reference, basically. That's the right way to do it. You're absolutely right. VJ says that explains so much, probably about the QEEG informed in regards to visual tissue being flooded. Oh, and so the visual system does get kind of lit up. All right, let me change a wire or two. So I'm going to do, let's see, need some more paste. Got to do C4. C4's on this side. How we doing? That's about right. A dab of paste. And then take the wire off the front. More questions. Jay Han, what is the best outcome in terms of red bars and blue bars at the end of a period? You know what? It doesn't really matter that much. That's mostly so you know it's continuing to happen. With like 2-channel training, it looks a bit different because you get fewer rewards. Let me put that C4 on. Whoops, not enough paste. So in this case, it's just showing us the points. The blue is the points per maze, and the red is the time. In most games in Eager, it's 3-minute time, so you just see the same red bar. You can see the pattern of the blue, and mostly, if you move too much or add too much noise, you'll see a lot of rewards dropping out. That's mostly what we use that for. Okay, again, I have some noise in my signal. Let me fix it here. I think my wires aren't. Oh. And let's see, so C4 minus A2. So now we have to go C4 minus A2. And I'm leaving PZ on the back of my head in the ground socket, actually, because I don't need to have another wire on for a ground. Let me stop moving the amp, and then let's see if I have my signals. Stabilize. Kind of an iffy signal. Why is that? C4... It's on pretty thoroughly. How's my ear doing? It's on pretty thoroughly. Is my ground wire loose? Let's see. And Artichoke, bipolar is now known as a sequential montage. It can be. Yeah, people still call it bipolar. I hate the term bipolar montage. Referential montage. Just suggesting you're using one set of subtractions. That's not the only way to train. In fact, the study I'm going to talk about tonight did Laplacian-based montaging for their training. There we go. I think we have better signals now. Yep. So now I have good signals, C4 minus A2. Let me change my system over. F5. And then F5. Oh, let me thresh it. Let me scale. There we go. And F5 again. And now I'm rewarding. You can see it says RWRD now in the middle of the screen. Now I'm rewarding 11.5 hertz, which is the SMR on the sensory motor strip, to sort of cap off the other down training I did, because the singulates can be a little sensitive. So I didn't want to leave myself with just a little bit of singlet manipulation, not knowing how it would respond. I don't do a lot of this protocol. So I wanted to do some of it and then add a little SMR to kind of tamp it down in case it makes me feel a little wired. Training, especially F4 to 7 down, that component at FZ, for some people can be a little activating. I don't think it is for me, just clarifying. Hey, Joe Barr, how are you doing, sir? Within each session, can you observe the power of the reward inhibit bands trending in the expected direction, or is that only observed after many sessions? So this is an open argument in the field, and I would say that a lot of people sit there and stare at the power changes and the ratio changes across time, and will use that to adjust what they're doing. And I was trained to do that very early on. And I am here to tell you it doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you as well that if you look for that, you might not get that, and you can still get a training effect. Remember that a lot of people train at 1, 2, 3, or 4 channels, especially 1 and 2 channels. And so if you're training someplace, you might get an effect under the location where you can see it. You might get an effect elsewhere, or you might get an effect later. So a lot of my PhD work was looking at the traces, the signals of the training process itself happening. So I did a 64 channel cap on top of individual training electrodes and did a blind versus real kind of training paradigm, and looked at how the brain was reacting to neurofeedback changes. And we got changes for the non-sham conditions. We got changes across 5 days for everyone, pretty much. I think everyone. Of the 40 people, there was 24 that were real and 16 that were in the sham group. And all 24 had really nice evolution of the EEG if you looked across time. But if you looked across different time scales, what you saw was different. So if you look at the first 10 minutes, the next 10 minutes, and the third 10 minutes in a 30-minute session, you can see an evolution. But if you look at the first session, the third session, the fifth session across a week, you see a different evolution in different aspects of the waveform. So the waveform doesn't move in a linear way when trained in a way you can necessarily see. And I tried to do an analysis to predict who was going to show an effect on performance, on attention, and on the EEG based on within session effects. And I couldn't find one. Basically we did really, really sophisticated work decomposing really atomic mathematical objects in the EEG, trying to find the thing that predicted if somebody was having an effect. And I did find something that's something different that became that. But I was looking for a change in session. And in something like 40% of people, you cannot see a change happening in the session in the thing you're training. You do see it later on, a couple hours, the next day, a week later, but you don't necessarily see it right then. You often don't, in fact. Now, what I found, to finish the story, is that you can see the brain reacting to the applause. So the beep that's happening right now is happening in response to 11.5 hertz going up, or 4.5 hertz going down, perhaps. And what that means is whenever there's a beep, it's in response to my brain doing something with that parameter, keeping it high, keeping it in range, whatever. And my brain, within 5 minutes roughly for most people, the brain starts to react in the frequency that you're applauding. So there's this event-related spectral perturbation or event-related desynchronization, an increase in energy briefly of the band you're beeping at or rewarding. Right after the beep, time-locked with the beep as an event, and then the event settles back down. And that's the learning event, if you will. This ERP changes, and this is what changes differently within session and across session. And this is why you can sort of see that the evolution can be hard to sort of like eyeball within a 20 or 30 minute session, and it might not be all that necessary. I would say the only time that you got to sit there and look at the actual amplitudes and ride them is when you're trying to kind of be pushy. There's ways of enhancing the thresholding process where you can sort of sit on the edge of a threshold and push someone's brain instead of gently rewarding. And it works, but then you're riding the trends and providing a little push here and there by changing thresholds. And I found that you don't need to do that. It's interesting. You can see the brain reacting to that too, but you don't need to do that. You can literally set it up to auto threshold and it works fine and the brain changes. So, just do that. So Vijay is saying, because the downtraining principle, if you struggle with alpha training of the cingulate, downtraining there can indirectly cause more alpha to surface. That's pretty cool. Yes, indeed. Vijay is asking, when do I typically do double down training? Double down can mean a couple things, Vijay. I have like a PZ double down, which is a complex trauma and CPTSD and kind of attachment trauma protocol that's pretty powerful, but feels crappy to do. Then there's this theta down. I do it FZ sometimes, people, which is really more of a theta inhibit, and that can be powerful as well. I mean, it ends up being goal focused or QEEG focused generally. Short answer. Radar Ashwood's asking, can excess theta be associated with pain? It can. Yeah, you can see disinhibited, often beta, but definitely theta sometimes. Triona's asking, trying to think how your down training may compare to Brainmaster's squash training. Oh, I'm sure it's very similar. Do you know more about how they're similar or different? Oh, I'm sure it's just a windowed squash. I mean, Brainmaster isn't classically, there's lots of things you can do with it, but classically Brainmaster is one of the old school systems. It does what Eager does. It does what the J&J Thought Technology, Infinity Systems do. They train amplitudes, and they're all doing roughly the same thing. Now, there's much more sophisticated stuff Brainmaster can do now, but the squash is an old thing. I mean, some of those names came, I believe, I don't know if he was the first person to use them, but Pete Van Dusen of Brain Trainer fame had the windowed squash and the full squash and a few other like things he would teach and put it into software eventually. So I just think we're talking about a windowed squash in Brainmaster. A full squash might just be inhibiting everything. You can also find, I guess George Martin did some work with entropy, and it was based on a paper about EEG microstates being highly correlated with intelligence and creativity. And so if you do broad squash, basically inhibit everything, you end up creating more microstates because you create less correlation between adjacent frequencies and sites. So a broad squash is one of the ways you can do an entropy, a George Martin style entropy protocol to create more subtlety. I haven't used that very much, but there are ways to do that. The old BioExplorer Yahoo groups, which were shuttered, I believe, used to have a set of designs for George Martin's entropy designs that were BioExplorer based. Those are probably still floating around somewhere, or George himself could be emailed. He tends to build designs, I believe, if asked. So I'm sure he has entropy designs for BioExplorer if you want to try that kind of stuff. And that's a broad squash as well. And I just think, Triona, you're talking about just where the frequencies are. Different squashes may use slightly different frequency ranges to inhibit. So I don't know. I'm sorry. Let me talk to you, though, about something I did read about, something I do know about, which is this paper, which came out recently in Communications Biology talking about inhibitions, downtraining of beta. Now, it was a really interesting study because they got very powerful effects doing only a little bit of neurofeedback. They also did very non-standard. Let me unhook myself. They also did very non-standard neurofeedback. They did fast beta rewards for a lot of it. A lot of their theory was that, there we go. A lot of their theory was that fast beta training was going to help in some way. And so they actually did both rewarding and inhibiting in the fast beta range. And they only did one band. And it was mostly, now, what was it? They did a bunch of measurements of other bands, and they found the effect of what I'm going to tell you was mostly in the 13, they called it 13 to 30, kind of not that specific. But what they did for the training was they either inhibited or rewarded 20 hertz plus or minus 5, 15 to 25, which is not something generally in neurofeedback we would do without expecting some over-arousal phenomena. But let me explain the protocol because you won't be as worried about it once you hear how little neurofeedback they actually did. So there's two different studies, and they rewarded or inhibited that 20 plus or minus 5, so 15 to 25. And in one study, experiment 1 is a force task, a grip strength task. Here, let me put my headset back on so I can hear how loud I am. And in this first study, they took 30 people. So overall, they did a 60-person experiment. So it's pretty well powered. And the first 30, they did a grip strength task, looking at how strong the grip was. And their theory was that increased beta was going to mean increased grip strength. And they were trained, the individual participant was trained to, within one session, do several trials where they would basically have to get 2 seconds above threshold of a beta change, either above or below threshold. And so the same participant would do several trials, like 15 or 20 trials in a row, where they would get a baseline of the EEG. Then they would be given feedback, neurofeedback stimuli that applauded whenever their brain either went up in those frequencies or down in those frequencies. And this is at C3. And interestingly enough, they did C3 with a Laplacian montage. So they got a much more narrow signal. You know, the referential montages are not quite that narrow what they're picking up compared to a Laplacian or a current source density. So they did C3 training at this faster beta, up or down. And the same person would do both of those trainings. And so they did like 10 or 15 trials each, or 20 trials each. And each trial was like, 30 seconds of actual experiment, where they did baselining for 10 seconds. Then they did a feedback period for minimum 2 seconds and up to, I think, 15 seconds, where they had to sort of like sustain a change for 2 seconds, which is not, again, exactly how we threshold in clinical stuff, but it's, one of the ways that is done is with a static threshold or a time above threshold. It's an old school way of doing it. So they did that. And then they measured the grip strength. And then they did another trial, and they did that with either up or down within subject, the same person in one single trial of neurofeedback. And then the second was kind of similar. 30 different people came in and did 2 different days. And one day they were instructed that they had to do hand movements that were fast or hand movements that were slow. So the outcome, the test was different. How good are you at doing fast motion versus slow motion, if you will, on the second, on these 2 things again within subject. So folks came back and did essentially one thing. Now, in the force task, in the grip strength task, the ability to train down the beta, or as the beta trained down, that actually had greater grip strength. And if you train the beta up, you got less variability in motor behavior. It was kind of an incidental finding in the paper. They sort of said that, in the beta up condition, we got more motor rigidity, more similar motor behavior across the trials. So it kind of locked people into their behavior, pushing it up that much in those frequencies, which, if you do neurofeedback, you sort of understand. Doing some C3 beta training can be a little pushy, and this was 15 to 25. This is probably allowing a lot of very fast beta, and generally, there's some very unhelpful beta for many people, beta spindles that occur in like the 18 to 23 range. So they probably should have avoided that, but they didn't. And it's just one session, and they did both up and down within one person. And the beta down training meant better grip strength. The beta up training meant more similarity across trials. Interesting. Now the other experiment is where I thought sort of the magic was. They did down training, 15 to 25. Versus up training, same protocol, same C3 Laplacian, but the subjects were told to either speed up for a motor task or to slow down, to do as slowly as possible. And they found, let me get you the exact couple observations I was making notes of. Let's see. I'm here. So 2 separate sessions. And let me give you the actual methodology here. So each session had one type of beta modulation, up or down as well. Oh, sorry, it looks like I was wrong. So in both of the sessions that the subjects came in for in the second experiment, they did the slow and the fast instruction for the dependent variable. But the sessions were either an up training or a down training, and they were separated by several weeks to prevent any crosstalk, basically. And so they basically did similar kinds of 2 seconds criteria, and they did 80 trials, basically, of training or 60 of sham. And they did within subject shams as well, which is pretty cool. So let's see. So in the experiment 2, the speed task, the most striking change that I thought about was that changes in beta showed sort of context-dependent effects. Meaning, if you were good at lowering your beta, you got better at following the instructions of slowing down when instructed to slow down or speeding up when instructed to speed up without losing any control. Like you had a more fine-grained control. But if you increased the beta, you lost that variability, which I thought was really interesting. And then in the slow condition, people that couldn't bring their beta down, they actually failed to do that slowness quite as well. So very interesting stuff. And, for years, there's been this idea in the field that maybe you just need to exercise, not up or down, but exercise. And this would say, this shows that up and down do different things, and they're not the same thing. I mean, my research shows that, you get frequency-specific event-related perturbations in the brainwave you're training. So we know it's frequency-specific already, but this showed that the same manipulation, same band, up or down in the same person has differential effects. And the effect overall was similar across people of improved motor control with that downtraining. Now, I'm assuming with the downtraining, because it was, or I assumed anyways when I first read the methodology, that it was like a beta inhibit, a high beta, making, helping you relax your body, becoming more smooth, that kind of stuff, to exert better from relaxation. That's kind of what I assume. And there may be something in there about that. But they did another analysis looking at, well, what actual frequencies are involved with this effect. So we saw the ones that could do this downtraining better had better effects both on speed and on grip strength, speed control, so variable control as well as power. But, what frequencies in the brain actually predicted this success, this ability to do that? And it turns out that it's not the 15 to 25. It's really like somewhere in the 8 to around 20 range. So even though they were not training in the SMR range, they showed changes in SMR basically were part of this. If you're more able to make the 12 to 15 hertz, that's because you're down training the 15 and above. And you're probably getting some change in 18 to 23. So any anxiety, any beta spindles, 20 to 25. And there's a roll off in the filter. So you get up to 28 or 30. So some body tension gets trained down. So, it seems like the methodology doesn't fit clinically, but we can still sort of explain how the differential effects make sense based on what we know clinically about how beta versus SMR operate. And the effect they found was actually more in the SMR and the beta range below where the bulk of their training occurred. So they really need to go back in and do a more classic set of experiments looking at 12 to 15, 15 to 18, and 18 to 23 or something. That'd be uncomfortable. I mean, just look at my research. I did 12 to 15 versus 15 to 18 rewards at C3, and you can see a frequency-specific effect happening across those two frequencies. The brain does not treat them the same. So if you're rewarding 15 to 25, there's a bunch of stuff in there the brain's going to maybe decide to do with bands that are dominant. So I mentioned there's lots of reasons we downtrain. And I also mentioned that the bands I set up initially for myself were treated differently, if you will, by my brain and by the software. Part of that's the thresholding. 25, 65, 15 means the 65 reward or 35% inhibit is actually stronger than the other two bands, which are at 25 and 15 respectively. But also the width of the band, how many hertz you include in the band matters. And there's the 1/F rule. Lower frequency brain waves have more power. So delta has a lot more power for one delta wave compared to like one gamma wave or something. So that's how I construct these ranges where I'm thinking about, okay, it would take a certain amount of power in a burst, in a high beta to show up against 5 or 10. So if I have a high inhibit 20 to 32, you're going to have a pretty big beta burst somewhere in there for it to show up much in the band at all. But 4 to 7, that'll capture things. And 12 to 20, because there are some specific beta generators on the cingulates, on the precentral gyri, C3 and C4, then you end up being able to capture specific contributions of beta and low beta generators at those big tissues. So this is sort of why we create this different set of bands. Even though they're all inhibited, they're not exactly felt the same way because of a combination of how wide the band is, the frequency range it is. As you go up in frequency, you drop in power, and the inhibit percentages are effectively different, biasing the brain to notice the impact of the one that has a stronger, if you will, inhibit going on. So that's the mechanism there that sort of goes into designing that kind of protocol. All right, Triana has more questions. The squash question, we got that one, cool. El Chatarino, hello. Is that just the best area to allow things to fluctuate by leaving alone, or rewarding the 8 to 18, 20 hertz range while managing inhibits through the actual modulation? Yeah, I mean, I think in this paper, they should have inhibited higher betas. And there's another paper out there. It's not a very great paper because it's, again, not a clinical approach. So we don't do this in the clinics. But there's a paper showing that if you don't inhibit high frequency betas, then you cause muscle fiber recruitment. You teach the body to get tighter, to basically create artifactual driven reward in the neurofeedback paradigm. And so this is one of the reasons we always inhibit very fast betas, to capture muscle, and so the person doesn't learn to tighten up in the chair, so to speak. So you would always want to add some high inhibit for at least that reason, and then the bottom edge of that inhibit should encompass the individual's own beta excesses or spindles or whatever else you need to do, or where in the tissue is it. Some brain parts don't like to be inhibited in the 20 to 22 range, and some are happy to do it based on what they're doing. So think about again, the QEEG and the person too. All these ideas go out the window once you actually start training one person's brain. Their ideas are always more important than your models of them ahead of time. So remember that. People are always right. People always know how they feel. So a lot of stuff on downtraining. I think I linked, or at least I put the reference for this paper in the show notes tonight. So go ahead and grab them if you're interested. We did not get really, really deeply into the paper, but I covered all the high parts. Here I have a secondary note I highlighted. Actually, they found that between 8 and 35 hertz and 1 hertz wide increments, the biggest impact was on 13 to 18. So yeah, I mean, all the clinicians and neurofeedbackers and all the skilled self-trainers know why 13 to 18 at C3 has an impact on the motor system. So interesting. I still think, though, that getting a change in 13 to 18 is going to happen if you're downtraining 15 to 25. So that's really probably what they were doing. Whether or not they come out and say it's an effect of the beta, they probably would get, this probably speaks to El Chad's question, they would get better effects if they were rewarding the proper 13 to 18, but then downtraining where it's excessive is my guess. So yeah, you can more finely activate and get control over those tissues. There is a way to train the left side C3 where you feel really rigid, you feel too activated. And that means you're being trained too fast. You're being rewarded too fast, which they saw in this study as behavior got rigid and less variable. So, we sort of know these things. We can understand this paper pretty well from a clinical perspective because the effects that they got make sense from a clinical landscape. We would see that sort of effect. If you train that by mistake, the person might feel great once or twice, but then have sleep disruption. I'm glad it was like a once or twice study. They didn't just train that beta forever, because it would have caused trouble. You would have had people coming in saying, wow, I am not sleeping at night. That's so weird. In fact, I bet you did. Of the 60 people they trained, both up and down, I bet 5, maybe 10 of them had sleep maintenance issues for 2 or 3 nights after each session, maybe one night. Because C3, if you muck with your fast beta, you'll often throw off sleep maintenance. It's heavily involved in that sort of phenomena. So I wish they had had that as a follow-up, because very, very likely. Just the same way that it was not surprising people tightened up doing beta rewards. So, well, there's that paper, guys. I hope you found it enjoyable. Let me know if you would like me to do more things like this, where I dig into one or two topics or some of the minutia of neurofeedback. Please do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel. My analytics show me that only about 50% of people who watch the channel or watch the videos are subscribed. So go ahead and hit subscribe. I want to get up to that magical 10,000 number. At this rate, it'll be 20 years. So maybe you and a friend can get me there faster. And let me know if there's specific topics you want me to cover. I'm always happy to dig into things and talk live, but if you give me some comments and questions on these videos later on, I will prepare stuff for you and come back with considered answers and things to break out and help you explain things you want to know about the brain, about biohacking, and about neurofeedback in general. All right, guys, well, have a great evening, and thanks so much for everyone's participation. We had a whole bunch of people here talking and hanging out watching tonight. I really appreciate that. And I will see you next Monday if you're live, and if not, maybe I'll see you on one of the recordings. Take care. Maybe you'll see me. Have a good night. Take care of that brain.